Imagine this: Constantinople, December 562. The winter light falls thin and gray across the marble colonnades of the great palace. An old man sits motionless in a stone chair near the servants' entrance, wrapped in a cloak that was once imperial purple but has faded to the color of old wine. His hands rest on his knees. They do not tremble. They have held swords across 3 continents, signed treaties that redrew the map of the world, and reached for an empress in the darkness of conspiracy. Now they hold nothing. He is waiting. Not for an audience with the emperor, those days are long past. Not for vindication or restoration. He is waiting because waiting is what remains when all other actions have been exhausted. The guards pass him without acknowledgement. Palace functionaries hurry by, their silk robes whispering against the stone. No one meets his eyes. To look at him would be to acknowledge that the empire's greatest general, the man who reconquered North Africa and broke the Goths in Italy, the man who saved Constantinople itself from annihilation, now sits like forgotten furniture in the corridor where slaves wait for instructions. His name is Belisarius. He has never lost a battle. He has lost everything else. This is the central paradox that will consume us for the next hour. How does a man win every war and still surrender every peace? How does absolute military genius translate into absolute political impotence? Was Belisarius a victim of cruel fate and imperial jealousy? Or did his very greatness, his unmatched ability to deliver victory, make him the most dangerous man alive to the throne he served? Was his loyalty a virtue or a pathology? And when survival demands compromise after compromise after compromise, at what point does the survivor become complicit in his own destruction? History has never quite known what to do with Belisarius. He doesn't fit. He refuses to be a hero in the traditional sense. He never seized power, never led a rebellion, never even seriously considered the throne that dozens of men whispered he should take. But he also refuses to be a simple victim. His choices, his restraint, his calculated submission, these were strategies as deliberate as any battlefield maneuver, perhaps more so. Before we go further, a quiet invitation. This is not a story with easy answers. It's a story about the space between glory and ruin, about what happens when excellence becomes its own prison. If that interests you, if you're drawn to histories that unsettle rather than reassure, then stay. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Not for entertainment, though there will be blood and fire and the fall of kingdoms, but for the questions that linger afterward. Now let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, before the triumphs, before the betrayals, before the long wait in the corridor. Let's go back to Thrace, to the Danube frontier, to the world that made him. Imagine a child in a stone farmhouse near the border between the empire and chaos. The year is sometime around 500, maybe 505. The exact date doesn't matter because on the frontier, dates are luxuries. What matters is the river, the Danube, and which side of it you wake up on. North of the river, Huns, Goths, Slavs, Gepids, all the tribal confederations that treat the empire as a hunting ground. South of the river, the pretense of Roman order, tax collectors who arrive with soldiers, and the constant knowledge that the border is a suggestion, not a certainty. Belisarius is born into this uncertainty. His family are not aristocrats. They are landholders, minor provincial gentry who speak Latin and Greek, but also understand the tribal languages, who know how to negotiate with raiders as well as resist them. This is crucial. From childhood, Belisarius learns that survival is transactional. You pay tribute, you build alliances, you bend when bending costs less than breaking. Honor is for people who can afford it. When he is perhaps 10 years old, again, the sources are vague, but the psychological pattern is clear. The Bulgars come. Not a raid, a migration. Thousands of them, moving south under pressure from other tribes moving west. The imperial garrison retreats to the walled towns. The farms are left to fend for themselves. Hold this image, a boy hiding in a root cellar while his father and older brothers negotiate above. The conversation is in broken Gothic and Latin. The Bulgar chieftain wants horses, grain, silver. He will take them with permission or without it. The boy's father offers the horses and half the grain. He pleads poverty for the silver. The chieftain accepts. The boy, listening from below, learns two lessons that will define his life. First, power respects only power. His father survived not through appeals to justice or imperial authority. Those are decorative concepts on the frontier, but through the clear-eyed assessment of what he could defend and what he couldn't. Second, submission is not the same as defeat. By giving the chieftain what he could not keep, his father kept what he could. The family survived. The farm survived. Within 2 seasons, they rebuilt. The boy never forgot this. But there's a third lesson, quieter and more corrosive. The empire did not come. The soldiers did not march out to defend them. The bureaucrats in Constantinople collected taxes from these borderlands, promised protection, and delivered paperwork. The people on the frontier understood what the people in the capital did not, that Rome was no longer an entity that defended its citizens. It was an entity that its citizens defended, out of habit, out of linguistic and religious identity, out of the fading memory of what Rome once meant. Belisarius grows into adolescence with this knowledge buried in his bones. He is tall, strong, quick. He learns to ride, to fight, to read terrain the way scholars read texts. And when the imperial recruiting officers come through Thrace looking for young men to fill the cavalry units, he volunteers. He is perhaps 15. Why? Not patriotism. That would come later, cultivated and strategic. Not glory. Frontier children know that glory is a story told about the dead. He joins because the alternative is waiting on the farm for the next migration, the next raid, the next negotiation in broken Gothic. He joins because the army offers a version of security that the land no longer does. For 10 years, he is nobody. A mounted archer in the Scali, the household cavalry units that guard Constantinople and campaign in the east against Persia. He fights in skirmishes along the Euphrates. He watches officers make catastrophic mistakes and survive them through connections and bribes. He watches talented soldiers die because they lack patrons. He learns the unwritten rules. Competence is valuable, but loyalty to a superior is essential. Victories are claimed by commanders who were miles from the fighting. Defeats are blamed on subordinates who followed orders exactly. This is his second education, more important than the first. The empire is not a meritocracy. It is a web of patronage, family connections, religious factions, and palace intrigue. To rise, you need not just skill but a sponsor. And to keep rising, you need to make yourself indispensable without becoming threatening. In 527, everything changes. The Emperor Justin dies. His nephew Justinian takes the throne. Now pause here. Justinian is not like the emperors who came before. He is a provincial like Belisarius from a Latin-speaking family in Illyria. He has no military experience. He is obsessed, genuinely, pathologically obsessed, with the idea of Roman restoration. Not the Christian Roman Empire as it currently exists, diminished and defensive, but the old empire, the Mediterranean-spanning colossus that ruled from Hadrian's Wall to the Euphrates, from the Rhine to the Sahara. He believes, with the fervor of a theologian, that God has chosen him to restore this world. It's an insane ambition. The Western Empire has been gone for 50 years. The Vandals rule North Africa from Carthage. The Ostrogoths rule Italy from Ravenna. The Visigoths hold Spain. Gaul is a patchwork of Frankish kingdoms. Britain is a legend. These are not provinces in rebellion. They are independent kingdoms with their own kings, their own laws, their own churches. To reconquer them is to declare war on the entire post-Roman world. Justinian needs a general who can do the impossible. More specifically, he needs a general who will attempt the impossible without ever asking why, without ever using success to leverage power. He needs a weapon, not a partner. He chooses Belisarius. The choice is not random. Belisarius has distinguished himself in the Persian Wars, not through spectacular victories, There are none to be had in the grinding border conflicts with Persia, but through reliability. He wins small engagements. He loses gracefully when outnumbered. He never blames the emperor for undersupply or poor strategy. He is 30 years old, relatively junior, and crucially, he has no family network in the capital, no senatorial connections, no independent power base. Justinian promotes him to Magister Militum, Master of Soldiers. It's one of the highest military ranks in the empire. Belisarius accepts with the same calm he brings to everything. He understands what is being offered and what is being withheld. Justinian is not giving him power. He's giving him opportunity and a leash. Then in January 532, the leash is tested. Picture this: Constantinople in flames. The Hippodrome, the great chariot racing stadium, is the center of the violence. Two factions, the Blues and the Greens, ostensibly sports fans but actually political religious movements with their own militias, have united against Justinian. It starts as a riot over arrested faction members. It becomes a full urban rebellion. The cry goes up, Nika, victory. The crowds are chanting it, breaking it like a wave against the palace walls. For 5 days, the city burns. Rioters storm the prisons, free the prisoners, torch the Senate house, attack the palace. Justinian's officials flee or hide. The emperor himself famously decides to run. The ships are ready. The imperial court is preparing to evacuate to Bithynia. Imagine the scene in the throne room. Justinian pale, his voice hoarse from smoke and fear. His counselors urging flight. And then his wife, Theodora, the former actress, the empress who rose from the theater and the streets, speaks. She doesn't shout. The sources tell us she is calm, almost bored. She says that purple makes an excellent burial shroud. She says she would rather die an empress than live as a fugitive. She tells the assembled men that if they want to flee, the ships are ready. She will stay. It's theater, magnificent theater, but it works. Justinian stays. And now he turns to the only man in the room he trusts to be as ruthless as the moment demands. Belisarius has 3,000 soldiers. The rioters number in the tens of thousands. The city is chaos. The factions control entire districts. A frontal assault would be suicide. So he doesn't assault. He maneuvers. He uses the palace's underground passages to move troops unseen. He waits until the Nika rioters mass in the Hippodrome, 30,000 of them packed into the stadium, chanting victory, proclaiming a new emperor. Then he seals the exits and sends his cavalry in from two sides. What follows is not a battle, it's a slaughter. 30,000 people trapped in the stone bowl of the Hippodrome, cut down by armored horsemen. The killing lasts hours. When it's done, the bodies are stacked so high that they have to be hauled out in carts for days afterward. The sources say 35,000 dead. The number is probably inflated, but the psychological truth is exact. Belisarius drowns the rebellion in blood. Justinian survives. Constantinople is pacified. And Belisarius is confirmed in what the emperor always suspected, that he will do anything required without hesitation, without moral qualm, without political ambition. This is the moment. This is where the pattern locks into place. Belisarius has proven he can be trusted with absolute violence because he has no interest in using it for himself. He is the perfect instrument, and instruments do not question. They perform. Within months, Justinian sends him to war. Now imagine the scene. June 533, the harbors of Constantinople, 500 ships, 15,000 soldiers, the largest military expedition launched by the Eastern Empire in a generation. The target, the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. The Vandals have held Carthage and the North African provinces for a century. They are rich, powerful, and militarily formidable. They control the Western Mediterranean with their fleets. They raided Rome itself, sacked it in 455, and carried off the empress and the imperial treasury. To attack them is to challenge a peer power, not suppress a barbarian uprising. The Senate opposes the war. Justinian's financial advisors oppose it. The odds are terrible. The distance is immense. If the fleet is destroyed, Constantinople is defenseless. If the army is lost, the eastern frontier collapses. Justinian orders it anyway, and Belisarius, standing on the flagship as the armada sails west, understands that this is not a military campaign. It's a theological statement. Justinian is announcing to the world that Rome is not a memory, it is a destiny. For Belisarius, the theology is irrelevant. What matters is the tactical problem. 15,000 men against a kingdom. No reinforcements, no retreat, success or annihilation. The fleet crosses the Mediterranean. They land east of Carthage in September undetected. The Vandal king, Gelimer, is inland, suppressing a revolt. His armies are scattered. Belisarius marches along the coast toward Carthage, moving fast, living off the land, giving Gelimer no time to concentrate his forces. At Ad Decimum, 10 miles from Carthage, the Vandals attack. It's a three-pronged assault, classically executed. Gelimer's brother leads the vanguard, hitting the Roman column from the south. Gelimer himself brings the main force from the west. A third force strikes from the north. On paper, it should work. In practice, it disintegrates. Belisarius does what great generals do. He sees the chaos before it happens and positions himself inside it. He holds the center with his heavy cavalry. When the Vandal vanguard charges, he lets them break against his line like water against stone, then wheels his reserve and crushes them. Gelimer's brother is killed. The vanguard scatters. Gelimer arrives to find his brother dead and his army fragmenting. He retreats. The Romans pursue. Within hours, Carthage falls without a siege. The Vandal fleet is captured intact. 100 years of Vandal rule collapses in an afternoon. But hold this image: Belisarius entering Carthage, walking through the streets where Roman governors once walked, sitting in the palace where the Vandal kings held court. He does not plunder. He does not allow his soldiers to sack the city. He issues proclamations in Justinian's name, declaring the restoration of Roman law. He sits in the Vandal king's throne and eats the Vandal king's dinner, prepared for Gelimer's victory feast. Its symbolism, deliberate and calculated. He is not a conqueror. He is a restorer. The city has not been taken, it has been returned. This distinction matters. It's what allows Justinian to claim divine sanction. And it's what keeps Belisarius from being seen as a warlord with an army and a kingdom at his back. Gelimer escapes into the interior with the remnants of his army. For months, Belisarius hunts him through the North African highlands. It's not a glorious chase. It's grinding, exhausting work, ambushes, skirmishes, supply problems, disease. But Belisarius is patient. He doesn't need a decisive battle. He needs Gelimer to run out of options. In March 534 at Tricamarum, Gelimer makes his stand. The battle is brief and brutal. The Vandals charge, are repelled, rally, charge again. Belisarius breaks them with a cavalry counterattack. Gelimer flees again, this time to a mountain fortress where he holds out for months, slowly starving. When he finally surrenders, he doesn't kneel. He laughs. The sources tell us he laughs and weeps and asks for a sponge to wash his face, a loaf of bread, and a lyre. The breakdown is total. He is brought to Constantinople in chains, forced to prostrate himself before Justinian in the Hippodrome, and then quietly given a country estate and a pension. The Vandal kingdom is erased. North Africa is Roman again. Belisarius returns to Constantinople in triumph. There is a parade, a formal ovation, not a full Roman triumph. Those are reserved for emperors, but close. He walks through the city with the Vandal treasure, the captive king, the spoils of a kingdom. The crowds cheer. Justinian embraces him publicly. And then, quietly, the emperor begins to dismantle him. Now pause here, because this is the pivot. Belisarius has just accomplished something no Roman general has done in a century. He reconquered a lost province, destroyed a barbarian kingdom, and delivered a treasury that will fund Justinian's next war. He is 35 years old at the height of his powers, the most successful general in the empire. Logically, this is the moment he should be feared. This is when emperors start watching for signs of ambition, when paranoia sets in. And Justinian is paranoid by nature. He trusts no one, sees conspiracies everywhere, and has already purged a dozen officials for suspected disloyalty. But with Belisarius, he does something more subtle. He doesn't arrest him. He doesn't exile him. He doesn't even demote him. He simply makes sure Belisarius never has enough resources to be dangerous. In 535, Justinian sends him to Italy. The Ostrogothic kingdom is in chaos. The old king is dead, the succession is disputed, and Justinian sees an opening. He wants Italy, not part of it, all of it. Rome, Ravenna, the entire peninsula. He wants to undo the fall of the Western Empire. He gives Belisarius 7,000 men. 7,000. To conquer a kingdom of millions, to besiege fortified cities, to fight a professional Gothic army that numbers in the tens of thousands. It's absurd. It's insulting. And Belisarius accepts without complaint. Why? Because complaining would be insubordination. Asking for more resources would be questioning the emperor's judgment. And questioning the emperor is the first step toward treason. So Belisarius takes his 7,000 men and sails for Sicily. Imagine the calculation he's making. He can't win through force. He doesn't have the numbers, so he wins through momentum. He takes Sicily in weeks, almost without fighting. The Gothic garrisons are isolated, undersupplied, and demoralized. He doesn't besiege the cities, he negotiates. He offers terms, safe passage money. The Goths surrender. Then he crosses to the mainland and takes Naples. Here there is fighting, brutal and desperate. The city resists. Belisarius uses an old aqueduct to infiltrate troops into the city. They open the gates from inside. The sack is savage. He can't stop it entirely, but he limits it, executes the worst looters, and restores order quickly. Rome hears this. The Senate sends envoys. They don't want a siege. They don't want to be caught between the Goths and the Romans. They open the gates. Belisarius enters Rome in December 536. Hold this image. The general who saved Constantinople now stands in the Forum, in the city that gave its name to an empire that hasn't been held by a Roman emperor in 60 years. He is the first imperial general to stand here since the fall, and he has 5,000 soldiers left. Disease, desertion, and combat have eaten the rest. The Gothic king, Vitiges, responds with everything he has. 40,000 Goths march south. In March 537, they surround Rome and begin the siege. For a year and 9 days, Belisarius holds the city with a force outnumbered 8-1. It's not a static defense. He raids constantly, hitting the Gothic camps at night, ambushing supply trains, keeping the enemy off balance. He repairs the walls, rations food, and uses the Tiber River to bring in grain. He fights battles at the gates, personally leading sorties because he can't afford to lose officers. The sources describe him everywhere at once, on the walls directing artillery, in the tunnels collapsing Gothic siege mines, at the gates repelling assaults. He is 40 years old and he fights like a man half his age because he has to. There is no margin for error, no reserves, no reinforcements until Justinian decides to send them. And Justinian sends nothing. For months, nothing. The messages from Constantinople are full of praise and empty of troops. This is when Belisarius begins to understand. The emperor doesn't want him to fail. That would be disaster. But he doesn't want him to succeed too easily either. A general who can hold Rome with 5,000 men is too competent to fully trust. So Justinian waits, letting the siege grind on, watching to see if Belisarius breaks or rebels or simply dies. Belisarius does none of these things. He holds. When reinforcements finally arrive, not many, never enough, but some, he goes on the offensive. He breaks the siege, chases Vitiges north, and lays siege to Ravenna, the Gothic capital. For 2 years, the war drags on. Cities change hands, Gothic armies rally and collapse, and Belisarius inches forward. It's not the lightning campaign of North Africa. It's exhausting, attritional, and politically poisonous. Other generals arrive from Constantinople, nominally under Belisarius's command but actually answering to palace factions. They undercut him, compete for glory, and send back letters blaming him for delays. In 540, Ravenna is on the verge of falling. Vitiges is ready to surrender. The Gothic nobles send envoys to Belisarius with an extraordinary offer. They will surrender the city and the kingdom if Belisarius declares himself Western Emperor. Imagine this moment. The offer is real. The Goths mean it. They would rather submit to Belisarius than return to Eastern Roman rule. They see him as a king in all but name, a warrior emperor who has earned their respect. If he accepts, he becomes the Augustus of the West, ruling Italy, North Africa, and potentially Spain. He would have an army, a treasury, and legitimacy. He refuses. Not publicly, not immediately. He pretends to consider it, uses the negotiations to enter Ravenna unopposed, and then arrests Vitiges, proclaims the city for Justinian, and sends the Gothic king to Constantinople in chains. The other generals are furious. They accuse him of treason for even negotiating with the Goths. The palace factions use the accusation to poison Justinian against him. And Justinian, paranoid and calculating, recalls Belisarius to Constantinople. He returns in 541. There is no triumph this time, no parade. He is quietly sidelined, given ceremonial positions, watched. Justinian has what he wants, Italy, or most of it, and he no longer needs Belisarius to be brilliant. He needs him to be quiet. For 2 years, Belisarius waits, and while he waits, Italy collapses. The generals Justinian sent to replace him are incompetent or corrupt or both. The Goths rally under a new king, Totila. Cities are lost. Rome itself is abandoned, left empty and besieged. In 544, with the Italian campaign in ruins, Justinian sends Belisarius back. But he sends him with almost nothing. 4,000 men, no money, no supplies. It's a suicide mission disguised as a restoration. If Belisarius wins, Justinian reclaims Italy. If he loses, Justinian blames him. For 5 years, Belisarius fights a losing war. He holds cities with skeleton garrisons. He wins skirmishes and loses territory. He begs Constantinople for reinforcements and receives nothing. Rome falls to Totila. Belisarius almost retakes it, then loses it again. In 549, he is recalled for the final time. The Italian War will drag on for another decade, but Belisarius is done. He is 55 years old. He has spent 20 years in the field, won 2 kingdoms for the empire, and has nothing to show for it but scars and silence. He retires to Constantinople. He has a palace, a fortune, a wife, Antonina, a woman as politically astute and ruthless as Theodora herself, who has been both his greatest asset and his most dangerous vulnerability. He has no children, no heirs, no faction. And then, for 13 years, he simply exists. Now imagine the slow erosion. This is not a dramatic fall. There is no battlefield catastrophe, no sudden betrayal. It's quieter and more corrosive than that. Belisarius lives in the capital, wealthy and powerless. He attends court. He advises when asked on military matters. He is polite, deferential, invisible. Younger generals ask him about campaigns. He tells them what they want. Justinian ages. The emperor is 70, then 75, then 80. The great project of restoration has stalled. Italy is ruined, bled white by 2 decades of war. North Africa is restive. The treasury is empty. In 559, the Huns come to Constantinople. A massive raiding force crosses the Danube, sweeps through Thrace, and approaches the walls of the capital. Justinian panics. The regular armies are scattered, the garrison is weak, and there is no one in the city capable of organizing a defense. Except one man. Picture this: Belisarius, now 65 years old, called out of retirement. He has no army, so he raises veterans who served under him decades ago, volunteers from the city, a ragtag militia of old men and boys. He has perhaps 3,000 fighters. The Huns number 20,000. He doesn't fight them directly. He uses the terrain, sets ambushes, harasses their scouts, and makes them think they're facing a much larger force. At a narrow pass north of the city, he stages a cavalry charge with a few hundred horsemen, timing it perfectly so the Huns see only the front ranks and imagine thousands behind them. The Huns retreat. Constantinople is saved, again. Belisarius returns to the city in triumph. Again, the crowds cheer, again. Justinian embraces him publicly, again. And 6 months later, Belisarius is arrested. The charge is conspiracy. Allegedly, he plotted to assassinate Justinian. The evidence is thin, confessions extracted under torture, the testimony of slaves, the usual palace intrigue. It doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is that Justinian is 83 and terrified of dying. He sees plots everywhere. And Belisarius, despite everything, is still the most dangerous man in the empire, not because he has power, but because people remember when he did. He is not executed. Justinian can't quite bring himself to kill the man who saved him 3 times over. Instead, Belisarius is stripped of rank, confined to house arrest, and publicly humiliated. His fortune is confiscated. His name is erased from official documents. For 8 months, he disappears from history. The sources fall silent. We don't know where he was held, what he said, whether he protested or simply endured. Then in March 563, Justinian relents. Belisarius is released, his property restored, his rank returned. There is no explanation, no apology. He is simply let go as if the arrest was a bureaucratic error. He lives another 2 years. The sources tell us almost nothing about this time. He is old, possibly blind. Some accounts say he was blinded as punishment, others that it was age or disease. The story that he became a beggar on the streets of Constantinople is later invention, medieval morality tale. But the emotional truth is exact. He is powerless, invisible, forgotten. He dies in March 565. Justinian dies 4 months later. No one writes eulogies for Belisarius. There are no monuments. His campaigns are recorded in dry official histories that credit Justinian with every victory. He is buried quietly, and for centuries his name fades. Now pause here at the end and hold the full weight of it. Belisarius reconquered 2 kingdoms. He saved Constantinople 3 times. He won every major battle he fought across 3 continents. He served one emperor with absolute loyalty for 35 years. He never rebelled, never seized power, never betrayed a confidence. And he died powerless, humiliated, stripped of everything but his life. So what do we do with this? How do we read him? One interpretation: he was a victim. Justinian used him, discarded him, destroyed him out of paranoid jealousy. Belisarius was too loyal, too honorable, too naive to protect himself in the viper's nest of Byzantine politics. He should have taken the throne when it was offered. He should have rebelled when he was arrested. His loyalty was his tragedy. Another interpretation: he was a weapon, and weapons don't have tragedies. He knew exactly what he was. He chose loyalty not out of virtue but out of clear-eyed calculation. Rebellion would have meant civil war, the collapse of the empire, his own death or worse. By serving Justinian without question, he survived longer than any rival general, died in his bed, and avoided the executioner. His submission was his strategy. A third interpretation, darker and more complex: he was complicit. Every time he followed an impossible order, every time he conquered a kingdom with insufficient forces, every time he allowed Justinian to take credit for his victories, he reinforced the system that devoured him. He enabled Justinian's delusions of restoration, campaigns that bled Italy white and left North Africa vulnerable to reconquest within a generation. His brilliance made atrocity efficient. His loyalty made tyranny stable. The sources don't tell us which interpretation is true. Probably all three contain pieces of the truth. Belisarius was victim, strategist, and enabler, sometimes in the same moment. But here's what we can say with certainty. He understood the game. He understood that Justinian needed him to be indispensable but not independent, brilliant but not ambitious, successful but not threatening. And for 3 decades, he walked that line without falling. That takes a kind of genius all its own. Not military genius, but psychological genius. The ability to suppress ego, manage fear, and calibrate submission to survive. Was it worth it? Did he win by losing? Consider the alternative. If he had taken the Gothic offer and declared himself Western Emperor, what then? Civil war with Constantinople. Justinian would have sent everything he had to destroy him. The empire splits. The Persians invade in the east. The Goths and Vandals rally in the west. The fragile restoration collapses entirely. Belisarius would have ruled briefly over the ruins, and then he would have been remembered as the general who broke Rome for his own ambition. By refusing, by submitting, by enduring humiliation after humiliation, he preserved something. Not the empire, that was already doomed, the restoration already failing, but the idea of the empire, the possibility that Rome could be more than warlords carving up the corpse. He died powerless, but the empire survived him. And for a man raised on the Danube frontier, taught that survival is the only victory that matters, maybe that was enough. Or maybe that's just the story we tell ourselves to make sense of a life that refuses easy sense. Here's the question history cannot answer. Was Belisarius's loyalty a choice or a trap? He lived in an empire where rebellion meant annihilation, where success bred suspicion, where the only way to survive at the top was to constantly perform submission. Every victory made him more valuable and more dangerous. Every act of loyalty had to be repeated, escalated, proven again. Could he have stopped? Could he have retired after North Africa, walked away with his fortune and his fame, lived quietly in some provincial estate? Probably not. Justinian would have seen retirement as the first step toward conspiracy. The palace would have whispered. The paranoia would have grown. Could he have been less brilliant? Could he have lost a few battles, demonstrated fallibility, made himself less threatening? Maybe. But that would have meant abandoning soldiers, losing cities, failing the empire he served. And Belisarius, whatever else he was not a man who could choose failure. So perhaps loyalty was the trap. Not imposed from outside, but generated from within. The psychological cage built from competence, duty, and the frontier child's knowledge that survival depends on being useful. In the end, Belisarius survived longer than almost anyone in Justinian's court. He outlasted rivals, conspirators, and a dozen purges. He died in his bed at 70, which for a Byzantine general is practically immortality. But he lost everything he built. The Italian conquests collapsed within a generation. The Lombards invaded. Ravenna fell again. Rome became a backwater. North Africa was reconquered by the Arabs. The restoration Belisarius bled for evaporated like morning mist. What lasted was the memory, distorted, mythologized, turned into moral fable. The general who won every battle, the loyal servant betrayed by his emperor, the beggar who once commanded armies. None of it quite true, all of it emotionally accurate. Because the real story is harder to mythologize. A man who understood that excellence is dangerous, that loyalty is transactional, that survival requires the constant calibration of submission and strength. A man who chose endurance over glory, who traded dignity for longevity, who won every war and lost every peace because winning and losing were never the terms that mattered. The question Belisarius leaves us with is this: in a system that devours its best servants, is collaboration survival or suicide? Is there virtue in endurance, or does endurance without resistance become complicity? He never answered. He just kept going, kept serving, kept bending until the very end, when he sat in that corridor near the servants' entrance, waiting for nothing, remembered by no one. And perhaps that was his final victory, to become so completely what the system demanded that he disappeared into it entirely, leaving behind only the uncomfortable question of whether he was destroyed by his loyalty or saved by it. History has never quite decided, neither should we.